So excited to introduce you to our new webinar platform with GoToWebinar. If you've attended some of our webinars in the past, you know we have been looking for a good platform. So we're excited to be with GoToWebinar today. My name is Jessica Mackey, and I will be your host today. I am from Africa Business Portal. So Africa Business Portal, we are a network. We believe in working together. And so we're trying to bring people together who can help provide solutions for U.S. Africa business. And we believe that this is done through what we like to call solution providers, which is essentially U.S. and African companies, ABP expert advisors who have experience in a vast variety of different fields, ABP advisory groups, as well as collaborating organizations. And so we're really pleased to have been able to work with organizations like OPIC and to bring you today's webinar with our presenter, Allison Gurmick. She is the Director of Corporate Development at OPIC, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, which, as you know, is the U.S. government's development finance institution. She joined OPIC in 2004, and just looking at her resume and talking to her, you realize she's kind of an OPIC all-star. She has lots of experience counseling U.S. firms and investors who are pursuing investments in over 100 different emerging market countries, including many in Africa. She's responsible for leading the coordination of OPIC's various business development efforts and designs, and she implements strategies to achieve the agency's regional and sectoral priorities. She's also responsible for cultivating working relationships with other governmental entities, business organizations, as well as foundations. And on top of all this, she chairs OPIC's Innovative Financial Intermediary Program, which is a $500 million pilot program to support smaller scale financial intermediaries. She also is a frequent presenter at trade and investment conferences and conducts various training seminars. So she has had lots of experience talking about OPIC and their different programs, and we feel very, very lucky to have her with us today. So with no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn you over to Allison. Allison, are you there?
I am. Thank you, Jess. That's such a kind introduction, and it's such a pleasure to be on the phone this afternoon with all of you. I also want to give a special thanks, not just but also to Lee Clegg and the Africa Business Portal for being so kind as to invite me to participate on today's webinar. We're going to go ahead and load my presentation. So let me just go ahead and pull that up for you all. I'm excited to have a chance to talk with all of you about OPIC's work in Africa. As Jessica mentioned, I've been responsible for business development here at OPIC, and since I've started counseling U.S. companies here about 10 years ago, I've seen our portfolio in Africa specifically increase fourfold. So it's a pretty exciting time for us to be talking about investing in Africa and how OPIC can help U.S. companies that are interested to either enter or expand on the continent. So our first slide here, I'm going to talk specifically about OPIC as an institution. I want to give all of you on the phone who haven't had a chance to interact with us before a bit of insight to who we are as an organization and what we do. And then from there, I'll talk more specifically about what OPIC is doing on the continent of Africa. But a little bit of background to begin. OPIC, despite the funny sounding name, we are neither private nor are we really a corporation. We are a U.S. government agency. OPIC is part of the federal government, and our role is to facilitate and support U.S. private sector investment into emerging market countries or developing countries. More specifically, what we were given the authority to do by the U.S. Congress when we were created as an agency in 1971 is to offer financing and insurance products to U.S. companies so that they can make investments or expand existing investments in these foreign markets with a specific focus on projects or investments that will generate substantial positive development impact in these countries. So in fact, OPIC in a sense, an organization with a blended mission. On one hand, we're a development institution. We want to see sustainable economic development take place in these often very difficult markets. And simultaneously, by partnering up with the U.S. private sector in the undertaking of these projects, we hope that there are new business opportunities that are created for and accessed by U.S. companies and U.S. investors. I know that often when we hear about foreign direct investment, we're oftentimes thinking about the large U.S. corporations that are making investments, or we're thinking about the large infrastructure projects, the ports, the rails, the seaports. However, that being said, while OPIC does in fact support and finance many of these types of projects, we also provide financing for many smaller investments as well. And in fact, last year, in fiscal year 2015, approximately 3/4 or 75% of the projects that we supported involved U.S. small or mid-sized firms. And that's usually pretty standard for us in the last number of years. About 3/4 of our business is with smaller or mid-sized firms. Now, OPIC is a global institution, so we do have programs and products available in a variety of different markets. In total, we have the authority to provide our products in about 160 markets. That being said, we are probably active in about 100 of those 160 markets. In some cases, certain countries have, as you might say, graduated from OPIC support. In the 1970s and the 1980s, we were active in some markets that today have seen a very dramatic increase in their gross national income per capita and have found it much easier to access the commercial financial markets. And so for those reasons, OPIC has, in a sense, scaled down its programs in those markets. There are also a few countries on our eligible list where from time to time we may not be able to process many new applications because we are at capacity, that we've received a lot of interest from the private sector in these markets. We've made a number of commitments to provide financial support, and in an effort to diversify our portfolio, we're instead focusing on different markets. So it's always very helpful if you have a particular country or countries of interest to check in with OPIC. You can always use me as a resource, reach out to me and inquire as to the latest OPIC status in a particular market. But the countries that you see shaded in blue here on the screen in front of you, these are the 160 countries where we have that underlying legal agreement to offer our programs. Among the roughly 100 countries where I said we have activity ongoing, we presently have 20 billion, 20B with a B billion, in financing and insurance commitments in those 100 markets. So that's our active exposure. I should also mention, and you'll see this as we go through the subsequent slides, the products that OPIC offers, our financing products, our insurance products, these are fee-based products. OPIC is not a grant-making institution or an aid institution. We do operate on a business model. So we do charge interest on our financing products, we charge premiums on our insurance products, and generate a revenue stream. And it's from that revenue stream that we pay our way, we pay our operations. And in fact, every year for the last 40 or so years, we've actually generated enough revenue to have a profit, which has gone back into the U.S. Treasury. And that's something that OPIC and its staff are very proud of, that we are able to pay our way, so to speak. We're one of the very few self-sustaining agencies. So let's do a little bit of a deeper dive into what OPIC offers in Africa specifically. In Africa, we are authorized to do business in 47 different countries. These are the countries shaded in orange on your screen. So as you can see, We're very much engaged in sub-Saharan Africa as well as a number of nations in northern Africa. At the moment, we have about 25% of our global portfolio invested or dispersed into Africa. So that represents about $5 billion of the $20 billion portfolio into roughly 123 projects across the continent. Historically, since we started doing business on the continent in the 1970s, we have committed just shy of $12 billion US dollars across more than 500 projects. So we do have a lot of experience here within OPIC in providing support to and encouraging investment in a variety of different African markets. I get a lot of questions about Power Africa. Many of you on the call may be familiar with the program. For those of you who aren't, is a initiative announced by President Obama in 2013 as an effort to try to double access to power in sub-Saharan Africa. OPIC did have a commitment as part of Power Africa. OPIC's commitment was to provide up to $1.5 billion US dollars in financing and insurance to energy projects, power projects on the continent. I'm very pleased to report that to date we have now approved over $1.6 billion in commitments. So we have met and exceeded our commitment to the Power Africa initiative. And OPIC's commitment of $1.6 billion will support roughly 1,500 megawatts of new power capacity on the continent. Now, because we've reached our goal, that doesn't mean that we're finished or that we're done supporting new power projects. We continue to actually process a number of power transactions and have several more in our pipeline. So if you are interested in the energy sector, please do know that OPIC still is welcoming and encouraging new power projects. But I also appreciate that many of you on the phone may not be limited to an interest in power or energy. So we have actually another poll that we'd like to put out now, and Jessica is going to ably assist me with this process. But we have a poll that's going to ask all of you for your sector or sectors of interest. And you'll notice on the screen there's a couple of different options here. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds here to take a look at the list and make your selection. But this will help me to better assess the different areas of interest among those of you on the phone. And as we go forward and complete this slideshow today, I'll try my best to try to highlight some projects that I know of that may be of interest in certain sectors. So hopefully all of you have had a chance to look at those options and make your selections. And it looks like we're closing it now. And Jessica, how do the results look? I can't see them here from my side, but I think you could probably read out to me what the big one or two sector interests are.
Oh, that is so true. I'm so sorry that you can't see them. Agribusiness, 52%. Infrastructure, so energy and transportation, that's at 65% interest. Manufacturing, 43%. Tourism, 4%, and the other category, 52%.
No, that's great. Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. Well, this is fantastic because all of the sectors that you see highlighted in that poll are sectors where OPIC operates and has a history of providing support. So it looks like for the vast majority of you, there's definitely some overlap between your interest areas and OPIC's. And some of the projects that I'm going to be referencing in these subsequent slides fall into these various category areas. So I'll try to provide more detail as we go along. But I'll move on to the next slide, which provides you a bit of a preview to the next three slides I'm going to cover. These are our main product offerings at OPIC. We offer political risk insurance. This is the oldest product offering at OPIC. It's what got OPIC started way back when, even before we were an official legal entity. Before OPIC was formed by the U.S. Congress in the 1970s, we were actually operated as a program out of the State Department. We were initially created as a program as part of the Marshall Plan after World War II. If all of you remember your fifth grade history, you'll recall the Marshall Plan was the U.S. government's effort to try to rebuild Western Europe after World War II. And a critical component of being able to support investment into into Western Europe was to provide some sort of risk mitigation product to U.S. companies to make them feel more comfortable investing in a part of the world that has seen a lot of political turmoil. So we do still offer political risk insurance, and as we go along on these slides, I will provide more detail in terms of how this product works and what kinds of risks it would protect against. I will then subsequently talk about OPIC debt financing. This is what we offer in terms of loans and loan guarantees. And then finally, I'll talk a bit about OPIC support for investment funds. I don't know how many of you on the phone may be interested in private equity. Those of you who either represent fund managers, private equity fund managers, or perhaps act as consultants or advisors to funds. This may be something that would be of interest to you. We'll first talk a bit about political risk insurance. Again, you can think of this very simply as an insurance policy akin to what you would take out on your home or on your automobile. The idea is that you would take out insurance on your business assets, the investment that you're making overseas, in order to protect it against losses resulting from various political events. And I'm going to give you some examples of the types of political events that we cover. The first is what we call currency inconvertibility. It's essentially a fancy way of saying conversion and transfer risk. So if you are making an investment into a foreign country and you're generating revenue in local currency and you want to convert that local currency into U.S. dollars, or you want to remit U.S. dollars back to the United States, in the form of dividends or payments to your debt holders. This is the risk that the country's foreign exchange market will not permit you to convert or transfer. And in the event that that would happen, if you have currency inconvertibility coverage with OPIC, OPIC could step in and pay a claim to you as the insurance holder, and thereby avoid you absorbing the losses associated with not being able to make that conversion or to make that transfer of funds. The second type of coverage that we offer is expropriation coverage. This could include outright nationalization of an industry by the foreign government, or even outright nationalization of all foreign direct investment in the country. It also covers something that we call creeping expropriation. And creeping expropriation refers to incremental actions that governments take that at the end of the day deprive you of certain rights as an investor. And the kinds of examples I typically give are things like the government canceling a contract, breaching a contract that you have entered into with them. So perhaps you're a contractor, you're going to be building roads or building houses, and you have signed a contract with a government entity to pay you for your services, and the government breaches that contract. That could be considered an act of expropriation. We also have other variations of this coverage to cover things like wrongful calling of certain bonds, like bid bonds or performance bonds that you may need to post. For those of you interested in the energy space, you may have a power purchase agreement with a foreign government entity or an entity owned by the foreign government, and that power purchase agreement provides for a feed-in tariff. Perhaps there is an effort to change that feed-in tariff or eliminate that feed-in tariff from your contract after it's been signed and executed. That could be another example of creeping expropriation. So there are a variety of different ways that creeping expropriation can manifest itself. And so the takeaway I typically give to investors is if you're making an investment in the country, you're relying on the foreign government for certain approvals or payments, it's probably worthwhile to do a little bit of reading about expropriation coverage and maybe talk to someone here at OPIC in our insurance division to understand how a policy might be tailored to provide you a bit of peace of mind. The third and final area of risk that OPIC covers under its political risk insurance is political violence. That's a pretty straightforward coverage. It is coverage that protects you against losses resulting from things like war, revolution, politically motivated civil strife, acts of terrorism, and so on. It covers both the loss of assets as well as the loss of business income. So you'll see there's a photograph here in the slide. The photograph is of an investment that we supported in Rwanda. There was a project in Rwanda a number of years ago, a tea project, which suffered some losses resulting from political violence, and OPIC was able to pay out a claim to the insured. So we can cover loss of assets, things like equipment, furniture, furnishings, the actual building that may be owned, like the factory itself. The coverage can also protect against loss of business income. So this is really important. If you think about a scenario where you're operating a business, perhaps in a remote part of the country, and there's a critical road that connects your business to the market. If that road is compromised in political violence, so perhaps the road is bombed out, it's not passable, that means you can't get your workforce in and you can't get your product out. And so if that situation continues for a period of time and you're not able to run your business, obviously that impacts you very negatively. You're not generating any revenue. So we do also have a policy we can provide that would protect against losses resulting from political violence that are specific to your income, so loss of business income resulting from political violence. These coverages, as we call them, that we offer are all a la carte, meaning that you can take one, two, all coverages. So we really try to design the insurance policy based on the types of risks that the investor is most concerned about. A couple of the advantages of the insurance policy, we can write tenors or terms as long as 20 years. And so the advantage there is that OPIC locks in your premium pricing for the length of the contract. And so if you're concerned that political risk could increase over the years, you will not see a premium increase, a corresponding premium increase with that risk. Rather, we keep the locked-in rate for the length of the contract. Another advantage of the OPIC insurance is that OPIC provides advocacy to our clients. And what that means is, particularly in cases of, say, potential expropriation, we don't just sit back and wait for a government to expropriate a client's investment. If we are alerted to the fact that there may be a pending expropriation, so our client calls us up and says, Allison, I'm concerned because I got this particular letter or this call, or otherwise something is happening in the country that gives you concern, you put us on notice, and then that enables OPIC to reach out to the country either directly or through the U.S. Embassy or through the U.S. Ambassador to try to resolve the situation before it deteriorates further. So these are some of the advantages to have the OPIC insurance policy. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the next product offering. This is the product that I would say I see the most interest about when I go out and talk to small businesses. This is our debt financing. I can appreciate that in many low and middle income countries, it can be very difficult to find financing for investments, particularly if you're a small or mid-sized firm. So I'm going to talk specifically about our direct loan product. OPIC also has a loan guarantee product, but if there's a U.S. small or mid-sized firm involved in the project, OPIC is able to offer a direct loan to provide the financing for your project. We will not provide support in situations where you can find adequate commercial financing. We're not here to be competitive in the market. Rather, we're here to really fill gaps. We're like a lender of last resort. If you can't find the type of financing that you need, then you can look to OPIC as a potential substitute. We offer pretty flexible loan sizes. I think the smallest loan size we typically offer is about 500,000 US dollars. And again, we can go as high as 250 million US dollars to support those large infrastructure projects. We also specialize in doing longer tenors or longer repayment periods. A common concern that I hear from U.S. small businesses is that when they look at commercial financing options in some of these markets, they can only find loan repayment tenors of maybe 6 months to 5 years. OPIC, our tenors typically range from 5 to 15 years, and that gives our client, our borrower, ample time to start generating revenue, to kickstart their operations and begin generating sufficient revenue to pay back the OPIC loan. We also offer fixed rates, so you lock in a rate with OPIC for the life of the loan. We do require that there is significant U.S. private sector participation in the projects we support. And there's a variety of ways in which this requirement can be met, but the most common way is through a level of equity ownership in the project. So typically speaking, OPIC is going to look for at least 25% of the equity to come from U.S. persons. A U.S. person could be a U.S. citizen or it could be a U.S. permanent resident. And that's an important change at OPIC. That's been in place for a couple years now, but traditionally only U.S. citizens met our eligibility definition. We recognize that was a bit restrictive, particularly for members of the diaspora community. So U.S. permanent residents are now also eligible for meeting the U.S. nexus to qualify for OPIC financing. We can also provide financing to projects that do not have direct U.S. ownership if there's a long-term and meaningful contractual relationship with a U.S. firm. And the most common way that that is met is through a franchise arrangement. So for those franchisees in Africa that are entering into or have agreements with franchises in the U.S., we can provide financing to them to help them expand their number of units on the continent of Africa. So those are the two main products we offer. So if you're a business or an investor and you're undertaking a project on the continent of Africa, I can do two things for you. I can tell you about the types of political risk insurance coverages we can offer to you to help give you some peace of mind, to help mitigate against some of those political risks in the country. And or I can talk with you about a loan to complement the equity investment that you are making into the country. The third thing that OPIC does is we work with private equity funds. So if you're a fund manager and you're out there raising money to launch a private equity fund, we do have another program here at OPIC that accepts proposals to create an investment fund, and OPIC's contribution is as a debt provider. We provide a loan to the private equity fund to assist in their total capitalization. So to give you an example, let's say you have a $300 million fund. OPIC might provide in debt 80 to 100 million as part of the total capitalization, and the fund manager would be responsible for going out and raising the balance from the typical private equity participants, pension funds, insurance funds, and so on. This is not an on-demand type program like our financing and insurances. The investment funds program is operated on what we call a call for proposals basis. So periodically, OPIC will issue a call for proposals inviting fund managers to submit proposals to OPIC to create or to launch a fund based on a certain set of characteristics. OPIC would review these proposals on a competitive basis and then make determinations on which fund or funds to support. As Jessica mentioned, we also just launched a pilot program called IFIP, I-F-I-P. The name itself is very lengthy and cumbersome. It stands for the Innovative Financial Intermediary Program, IFIP. But IFIP is quite interesting. IFIP is an effort for OPIC to work with funds that typically are a bit smaller than what we would see in our investment funds program. These are typically funds that are raising no more than 100 million US dollars, and funds that have a particular focus on development impact or innovation. So they're doing something really creative and really impactful. For these types of funds, we have this separate channel that you can apply to, the IFIP channel. There's some more information on our website, and I'm certainly happy to talk more about it with any of you that are interested. But essentially, on a quarterly basis, we will review proposals from fund managers that are launching funds like this, smaller, very impactful, innovative funds. Again, review them on a competitive basis, but with the view of providing debt towards their total capitalization. So both these programs, the investment funds program and the IFIP program, the goal is really to try to catalyze more private equity investment or more investment capital for parts of the world, such as in Africa, that really do need more resources from a capital perspective. This is the second to last slide. This slide just captures some of our policy standards. Some of these I've already touched on, particularly those on the left side of the screen under the heading Eligibility Criteria for Investors. Again, we are an organization that's a self-sustaining entity. We operate on a business model. So our loans have to be repaid, our premiums have to be paid. And so because of that, we do require that the projects that we support are structured on a commercially viable basis. And so our clients, our prospective clients, are going to be expected as part of their application to provide us with, among other documentation, a good, solid business plan. As I said, they're also going to have to demonstrate that they have U.S. private sector investment in the project, that if there is government participation in the ownership structure, that it's on a minority basis, and that you have thought through and evaluated commercial financing options for your project, but have determined that either commercial financing is not available or is not adequate. It's not adequate to meet the needs that you have for the investment. On the other side of the screen, the right side of the screen, you see a couple of the policy standards that projects must meet. So as we, in the financing division or the insurance division, evaluate the project, simultaneously we have another division at OPIC called our Office of Investment Policy. They will evaluate the project to ensure that you comply with a variety of investment criteria. And some of the specific criteria to keep in mind: projects must comply with a variety of environmental and safety standards. We have a very detailed document on our website that walks through the kinds of standards that the project must meet. We also require that the project abide by internationally recognized worker and human rights. This is particularly important in countries where the country may not have labor laws in place that are to international standards. In those sorts of situations, we would potentially write language into the contract that we execute with our client that would bring the client to a higher standard, put them to an international standard rather than the country standard. And then finally, we also require that the project not cause any loss of U.S. jobs or otherwise adversely impact the U.S. economy. So again, OPIC, we are here to encourage sustainable development overseas, but we're not here to also provide for some adverse impact on a U.S. company or support things like outsourcing, business process outsourcing, runaway plants. Anything that we finance or insure overseas, we look to be additional to any existing U.S. business or U.S. operations. As I said, a couple of more examples that I can highlight given the diversity of sector interests represented on the phone today. And I have a couple of small pictures here to give you a little bit of illustration to what the projects actually look like. We did a health project in Angola in the last few years. OPIC provided just shy of 10 million US dollars for the diagnostic center that was being built in Luanda, which provides treatment and outpatient services. In the energy sector, we've done a lot. As I said, we've supported roughly 1.6 billion in commitments for power projects as part of Power Africa. One of those projects is a $13 million loan to a company called NextGen Solar to develop a 5-megawatt solar plant in Tanzania. Again, kind of moving clockwise, a project in Ghana is in the water sector. This is a very large project in terms of the OPIC commitment. OPIC's commitment was $150 million in political risk insurance for a company, a Florida-based company that was awarded a contract to support the Ministry of, I believe, Water and Energy or Energy and Water, trying to improve access to water treatment plants in the country, particularly in rural areas. And then the final example I have here, again, a smaller size loan, $3 million US, to a company in Senegal. This was an existing company, Aventura, and OPIC's loan was to help them expand, to provide funding so that they can purchase more equipment to provide out to farmers that needed assistance in having access to the kind of equipment to be able to harvest and run their operations. So agribusiness is becoming a very important sector at OPIC, an important sector focus for us. As part of the Global Food Security Act, OPIC is really committed to trying to increase its portfolio in the sector. While we don't do a lot in primary agriculture, we do some, but I would say a lot of the focus lately has been on what we would call the value-added processing and packaging, as well as the logistics services, the cold storage, the transportation infrastructure, and so on. So I would say for those of you on the call interested in agribusiness, that's certainly an area very near and dear to our hearts. There's some other examples I can point to that aren't here on the slide. We've done a lot in affordable housing over the last few years. Starting in roughly 2006, we committed to a number of affordable housing projects on the continent where OPIC's loan facilitated construction and development, as well as, in some cases, mortgage financing. So that, I hope, gives you a bit of color as to the different types of industries and sectors where OPIC might be able to provide some support. This final slide has my confirmation. There is one final thing I wanted to mention to you before we move on to a Q&A session. Obviously, there's only so much information we can cover in a webinar presentation, and so I hope that this is only the start of a more extensive dialogue with those of you on the call today. But OPIC does produce a number of domestic workshops every year. We usually do about 4 workshops every year. These are one-day workshops where we go out to a different U.S. city and we put on a program that provides very detailed presentations on different OPIC services, as well as the services of some of OPIC's sister agencies, like the Export-Import Bank, like the U.S. Department of Commerce, the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, and so on. We have 2 workshops coming up this fall. One workshop in Denver, Colorado on the 13th of October, October 13th in Denver, Colorado, and the second workshop in Baltimore, Maryland on November the 18th. So if you are interested to come and spend the day with OPIC and learn a lot more about what we do, or if you know of colleagues that you think may be interested, I'm very pleased to share that the Africa Business Portal is a supporting organization for our event, and through the ABP, we're able to offer a discounted registration rate of $35, which includes breakfast and lunch and materials and so on. So we're very happy to invite you to participate in the event, and I can also provide more details to any of you who are interested specifically in that workshop series. So I think that brings me to the end of my time. Again, thank you all for your time and attention. I'm going to turn it back over to Jessica and offer to answer any specific questions that those of you on the call may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Allison. Okay, if you see in your chat window, I have shared both Allison's email and the website that brings you to this Expanding Horizons event. And so, like she discussed, I know that those that have attended them have just raved about how wonderful they are. So I hope you can make it. Moving on to our question and answers. If you have questions, please feel free to go ahead and throw those out using the Q&A little icon in your panel. The first question was actually emailed previously by Evelyn. It says, there has not been much OPIC investment to countries like Sierra Leone. What prospects are there for funding BPO-related investments in Sierra Leone to help create jobs that generate a profit?
Great. Thank you, Evelyn, for the question. So it's timely that you ask this question because the president and CEO of OPIC, Elizabeth Littlefield, just returned from an investment mission to West Africa to try to bring attention to the need for greater foreign direct investment in the region, to bring along some private sector investors to look at opportunities, and to host some meetings to try to talk through some ways to try to get more investment ongoing on the continent, particularly in that part of the continent. In terms of sectors, in terms of BPO, I'm assuming business process outsourcing, that's not typically something we're able to provide support for given our limitation to supporting projects that could have adverse U.S. economic impact. Anything that involves outsourcing of operations is typically prohibited from OPIC support. But that's only one small example of a project that, or an industry we can't really support. I would say maybe 97% of the inquiries that I get on a regular basis are for sectors that we can support. So I would say in a country like Sierra Leone, some of the things that we'd be really interested to look at would be projects in the agribusiness space, particularly the value added. We'd be very interested to look at energy projects. Given the health challenges that the region encountered following the Ebola crisis, I would say projects that provide support to the health sector would also be something of interest to OPIC. So there's a variety of areas where I think OPIC can be very impactful, but specifically BPO would probably be outside of our area of abilities.
Okay. Also from Bo, he was wondering if you could briefly discuss the differences between the product services offered by both OPIC versus EXIM, because there is a degree when working with these two organizations that there's some overlap, and so he's specifically wondering in which circumstances you can kind of anticipate a little bit of overlap between what you guys offer.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. And Jessica, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a webinar with Exim Bank coming up in the not too distant future, correct?
We do, on September 14th.
September 14th. So there's a bit of a plug for the Exim seminar. But I can tell you in a very sort of simplified way, the way that I tend to explain the differences between those institutions, OPIC and Exim Bank, is by understanding what the role of the U.S. business or the U.S. person is in the project. If the U.S. company is selling a good or selling a service to a foreign buyer, and that represents really the extent of the transaction, a buyer and a seller and a product or service that's being sold, that typically is going to fall better into the realm of Exim Bank. But once that U.S. company is taking more of a long-term role in the project, so they're not just selling a good or selling a service, but they're actually going to have, as we say, boots on the ground. They're going to be taking a capital stake or an investment stake in the actual business itself, the business that's set up in that foreign country. So they're a partial shareholder. Or they're going to otherwise be on the ground in the country, operating the project, managing the project for a period of 15, 20 years. Those are typically then the scenarios where OPIC is probably the better fit. So it comes down to whether the U.S. company is an exporter or an investor in the project. Now, there are sometimes some gray areas, and in those cases, it can be very helpful to reach out and have a phone conversation either with myself or the person that will be doing the webinar for Exim Bank, Ben Todd. Ben and I know each other well, and sometimes we get on conference calls together and try to work it out. So I think the takeaway is really, use this kind of initial guidance I gave you to help understand what the likely differences would be and where you should probably start the conversation. But if you guess wrong, don't despair. We're always happy to get on the phone together, Exim and OPIC, and talk you through some solutions.
So just to clarify, as a follow-up question, people tend to either use Exim Bank programs or services or OPIC. You guys don't actually have clients that are utilizing programs from both?
There are examples of clients who have used services of both, but it's typically on very big projects, on big infrastructure projects where one lender would not be sufficient. Then you may have a scenario where OPIC's loan will help to fund some of the on-the-ground costs, the construction, the local procurement, the working capital, and Exim Bank's proceeds, the proceeds of the Exim Bank loan will fund the equipment purchased from the U.S. But again, typically this is on very big projects where you are going to need multiple lenders. Any one lender would maybe be hesitant to have that level on their balance sheet.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, another question from Elizabeth. It's a private equity question. She is wondering, when was the last time that OPIC announced a call for proposal, and when will the next one be?
So very good question. I think it's probably been close to a year or so since we had our last call for proposals. I believe there may be one coming out very soon. The best thing to do to be alerted when a new call is announced is to sign up on our website for email updates. That way you can be notified when a call goes out. You can also shoot me an email, and I can also pass along your contact information to the officer that would run our call for proposals so that you can be alerted directly when the call is open. But for the IFIT program, that special pilot program that I mentioned for smaller funds, impact funds, that, as I said, is a quarterly submission process, and the next deadline for that program is October the 31st.
Okay, I hope that answers that question. So the next question is First of all, it's OPIC used to have a program where qualified deal originators worked with OPIC, but this program is no longer available. Are there any programs for deal originators?
Great question. So yes, we did at one point have a program whereby OPIC had relationships with what we called loan originators that could help prospective clients with the packaging of their loan or insurance applications to OPIC. That program ceased operations a number of months ago. There is no decision yet on whether to kind of revive that program or replace it with something similar. So at this point, what we do is just encourage any advisors that do have clients they'd like to introduce to OPIC or clients with projects that may be eligible for OPIC support to, feel free to contact us through myself or our Director of Outreach, Larry Spinelli. We are points of contact for those advisors. We will also be talking internally about potentially having some more workshop or seminar offerings to be able to continue to outreach to and educate the advisor and consultant community as well as the small business community at large on programs evolving or changing at OPIC. But as far as a formal advisor program, we don't have anything quite yet as a substitute to the program we had previously.
Okay, and these events that you guys have coming up, they really are a good opportunity to be able to interact with people one-on-one, figure out what their project is and whether or not OPIC is a good fit. And so I hear good things. But our next question, and we have a lot of questions, and this will probably have to be our last one, but any questions not addressed during today's presentation will be addressed by Allison via email. So this last question, it asks for a quick update on the Africa Clean Energy Finance Initiative and OPIC's ability to fund this project preparation or to fund project preparation work to help get projects to OPIC implementation finance, as far as what funds are available or plans for new funds, and also what types of projects would be good fits for OPIC ACF support, and what is the process of applying. That's a really long question. Just,
Well,
address what you can.
Thank you for the question. So a bit of background for those of you that may not be familiar with the Africa Clean Energy Finance Initiative or the ACEF initiative. But this was an initiative that was launched a couple of years ago. OPIC was provided some capital to be able to offer grant-like funding. So it wasn't grants per se, but it was grant-like funding to be able to pay for certain pre-development costs that renewable energy developers would encounter specifically as they pursued opportunities on the continent of Africa. So it was basically like a reimbursement program for certain pre-development costs that the developer incurred. OPIC could, basically provide funding to pay for those costs. The hope was that by helping investors satisfy some of these pre-development costs, the developers would then have perhaps better positioning financially to move forward to execute the project and could then apply to OPIC for implementation financing to actually construct and operate the power plant or the project. The program has been extended, but in a bit of a different structure. My understanding is that the primary contact for ACEF is now with a different U.S. government agency, the U.S. Trade and Development Agency. Certainly happy for the person or persons on the phone interested in that program to provide a point of contact. But my understanding is that those of you interested in the ACEF 2, if you will, would approach the U.S. Trade and Development Agency.
Perfect. Thank you, Allison. Now we are going to go ahead and wrap up today's presentation. We want to make sure that you guys stay informed about what's going on. You feel free to join Africa Business Portal, but more important, we want to make sure you hear about these webinars that we have coming up, and hope to do another one with OPIC. And so, Allison, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for the great questions, and I'll look forward to reviewing any additional questions that come in.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you so much for attending.